All right, so this brings us to our final presenter. This kind of ties it all together, what we've talked about, the benefits of BLE, about notifying the community that the data that they're getting in the beginning of a mapping phase now incorporates BLE. And the purpose of that is not, as was pointed out by Rachel, was to let them know it's there, but also we don't want them to wait. So we brought in two people from the field to talk about their experience of using BLE and also talk about how can we get that early adoption? What can we do to do that? And to kick us off, we first have Susan Veillon from the Louisiana Department of Transportation. She has 28 years of experience with the Louisiana Department of Transportation Development, which 16 of those has been with the National Flood Insurance Program. Since 2015, Susan has served as the program manager for the Cooperating Technical Partnership program with FEMA's Risk Map program. She's a CFM, a member of the Louisiana Floodplain Management Association and Association of State Floodplain Managers. And if she could go anywhere in the world for free time, she'd love to travel up and down the East Coast, and being an East Coaster, I'm going to say you'd love it. Right behind her, when she's done, is going to be Whitney Montague. You've heard her already talk with answering some of our questions. She's got 30 years of experience. And from my experience of knowing her for the past many years, she wears so many hats. Right now is the engineer supervisor for dam safety and for floodplain management. She oversees the regulatory support, technical assistance, and stakeholder involvement on floodplain management and dam safety issues at the local, state, and federal levels. She works with the Arkansas towns and counties to ensure that the unique strengths and challenges of agriculture communities are recognized and incorporate into risk management strategies and resilience. And if I had to put a crown on her, she'd be our BLE queen. Her dream place is Ghana, and you're going to get a picture of that someday. Her dream place is Ghana. It's full of history and for her some personal significance to her ancestors. So with that, Susan, I'm going to pass the baton over to you.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. Thank you for having me today. So my first slide that is up right now is it's best practices, but it pretty much outlines how our office approaches BLE delivery. Fortunately for us, the CTP program is located within the state office of the NFIP. So we have different opportunities to meet with community officials. And when we do, we add the BLE to the agenda. Next. So our official rollout of BLE is through phase 1 discovery of the risk map program. And this is usually with our consultant. And so the BLE is introduced with the initial contact by phone when they're calling to discuss the discovery process and the purpose. So then they follow up with communities for further instruction. And then at the actual discovery meetings, we have computers set up and they work with the consultant, and our team works with the people in the watershed to give them some hands-on instructions and help them figure out, what that looks like for individual properties. So the challenge that we've had, while this is an effective process, that only using this process puts us behind on the BLE delivery, because FEMA Region 6 has really gotten way ahead of the discovery process with the BLE creation. Next. So when we do go to communities, we do the practical hands-on approach. And so we've had two different things. So one of the examples I'll give you is through the CAP-SASE grant program, we did do some hands-on training with them with a former consultant. And so what we would do was when we'd offer this, we'd ask them to gather some ECs from unnumbered A zones that they issued. And so then when we get there, and it could be other studies that they had, but we would compare the BLE elevations to what they were using. And that kind of gave them a little confidence, and actually, honestly, it gave me confidence when we first started, because I really didn't understand what we were, getting into. But after one of our first experiences, we showed up to uh, a parish in North Louisiana, a rural parish. And so we know when we show up that, we really didn't, our only expectation is that we're going to introduce BLE to them. So we know that it could go either way. They could either love it or be skeptical. So when they start comparing the ECs, and the guy from the police jury actually had high watermarks through the years, and it was matching up very close. So they were really excited. I was excited. Everybody was. So, they were sold on it. And so they actually had a era on their maps, and it happened to be in a wildlife management area. And it was really, it was back in the 80s. And I think somebody hand wrote on the map uh, that it was an X zone when it really should have been an A. So that the area that wasn't depicted on the flat maps. So there were a lot of claims in that area. So what they did, that gave them, empowered them to have a tool to enforce regulations in that area. And they actually adopted, well, I say adopted, they did a loan more to include that area of BLE so they could enforce it before their maps became effective. Next. So in Louisiana, we have a lot of levies. So BLE is delivered in one of two ways, depending on levy accreditation. So if the levy's not accredited, they're gonna find out that it was mapped with BLE as Natural Valley. So we've been in situations like that too, and yeah, that's not, they're not excited about it, but it does give us the opportunity to kind of show them what their firm will look like if they don't take a proactive approach on getting their levies, accredited. So if it is accredited, of course, it shows the levies protection. Next. So NFIP compliance. So during our compliance visits through our CAP program, we go prepared to discuss BLE. We actually, on our checklist before we leave, we see what watersheds are available in that community or parish, see what's on the BLE viewer, and we make up a packet of publications that Region 6 has online. And so we're able, and we go with our laptops, so we're prepared to do some hands-on training during the meeting. And that works out kind of good. And then they follow up with it later. Also, Region 6 offered Dustin Bussey to do some follow-up training virtually if they'd like. So we always offer them that. So it seems to be working. I feel like it's been pretty successful. And that's all I have today, and I'll turn it over to Whit.
Thank you. So I hope that everyone had a good lunch, because there are going to be lots of pictures of food today. So I'm going to talk to you about how we incorporate BLE at the local level to make it something that's more than pretty pictures on a wall, a really cool website, or something that only nerdy engineers like to use. And we call this the Arkansas BLE Special. Next. So when we talk about this special, we are building it. We're going to build it from the basics all the way up to everything with all the extra fixings on it. So at the very basic, you want to use your BLE as a minimum usage. It's advisory data. It serves as often it is the best available data in a community. Next. If you're going to extend your use of your base level engineering, think about it in terms of smart development. We've already heard many strategies, many excellent uses of using the BLE data to identify flood mitigation opportunities and also to analyze what would be the best one from a benefit cost analysis standpoint, from what a community can get the best bang for their buck and buy-in from their residents. But we can also use it to look at development scenarios. We've talked about it a bit, looking at one or two structures, but we can expand that and look overall. Next. And finally, if we're going to go all the way and actually make it a special, we're going to use it for a higher standard. We're actually going to expand our local floodplains and incorporate it in the ordinances and codes. In this way, creating that buy-in from the community and the community leaders. Next slide. So if we start at the basics, you know, the basics, it's that plain, boring, kind of soggy bottom of the BLE special. But it's the basic. It's what we need to start from, what we're going to build from. And in Arkansas, this is the minimum usage. It gives our local floodplain administrator some graphic tools to work with, things that really ease the communication between engineers and non-engineers, between technical people and non-technical people, because what you want is not a presentation, but a conversation. And the BLE data allows you to have this conversation, not only with the homeowner that comes in, but also with your county judge, with your county executive, with your the local development community. It's great on the basic level. We've heard this over and over again. You're in an approximate A zone. In Arkansas, we have what I call those wide open approximate A zones, huge A zones. It's very useful in those areas to determine your base flood elevation. And we can use it on our elevation certificates. And as Jack talked about, for our LOMA request in zone A. One thing I'd like to say, we really like it in Arkansas, and people have heard me say this before, but I was talking to some woman about her BFE, and I was saying, oh, it's 249.6 feet above sea level. And she just looked at me and she said, honey, you must not be from here because the sea ain't nowhere around here. And so now we have an opportunity to have a visual representation of that flood risk that really brings it home and makes the buy-in we need to reduce risk to our neighbors and family. Next, please. So this graphic that we talk about, Diane was talking about the yellow home and the red home, and I like to call it the Monopoly House of Doom, although some people have noted that red is actual hotel, but it's something that grabs your attention. It really, it allows me to speak to other people and say, here, this is what I'm talking about. I'm not going to talk about 249.1. I'm going to talk about 6 feet above the ground. Next. So that minimum usage, we're starting, but now let's put a little meat into the special. Okay, so we're going to add some meat to the special. Yes, I can use it to determine base level engineer, BFEs and approximate A's. And I'd love to hear from some of the local floodplain administrators if they're getting pushback from surveyors, because every once in a while I'm getting pushback from surveyors on using this. But you can use it for that. It's great communication. But we also want to use it to make sure that our residents know that there is flood risk. It's not just something that's happening in isolation, that there's a recognition that their homes, their property they are at risk of flooding. When people are coming in to submit for building permits, whether or not you have formally incorporated the base level engineering data into your regulations, you should always check to see, has this area been determined to be at risk of flooding? I even would say that it's almost an ethical duty to do so, because let's get away from ethics. Let's think about liability. If you have data that shows an area is at risk or may be at risk from flooding, and you didn't share it with someone, you may be at risk. They'll turn around later on and say, hey, you had this data. And I can say this because we had that situation happen in Arkansas. As we said, use it on your ECs. But what we really like, next, click please. We like to take it that one step further to make sure that we've had that discussion with someone. Because, if you're just talking to someone, they'll remember it until they cross the threshold and then it's out of their heads. But we have them acknowledged by signing an affidavit. The affidavit says that in this particular situation, we have not expanded our regulatory floodplain, so we cannot require you to use this data. But what we're saying is we are providing a recommended first floor level, a recommended BFE to design from, and you have been made aware of this, and please sign it and date it and show that we did have this discussion with you. Next. So we talked about smart development. We've seen that in a couple of several other presentations prior to me. So you do want to use this data for to identify flood mitigation opportunities. Next, please. This is when you're starting to put the extras into it. Next. So in this particular situation, this is a neighborhood in Northwest Arkansas. On the effective map, it is not mapped as an area prone to flood risk. But when we overlay the base level engineering data on top of it, it is quite obvious that this is an area that it's not only anecdotal flooding that's happening, but we can back it up with data that this area is at risk. And as Martha was saying, we can then use this data and leverage it in a mitigation application. Next. We can also use it to look at development scenarios. This is another example from Northwest Arkansas. And in this case, what you see is the mapping of the floodplain with the star indicating what was under consideration, what the location was for consideration for development. And this is looking at the base level engineering data. Next. And then when you include the development into the BLE model, you see that the green area that is to the right of the star, it has greatly reduced. So the open area, the non-floodplain area has significantly reduced. So that development where it is located has had a significant impact on flood risk in the area. Next. So this gives you an opportunity to consider, if you look at the difference between the open space around the star when it's blue, mapped in blue, versus the small area in the green, you'll see that this is an opportunity to say, well, just because it's an open area doesn't mean I necessarily should put that building there. Maybe I should consider another location for this development. I like to tell mayors, they'll say, well, no, we already have, a contract. And if we tell them to move, and, resilience is this big thing we're hearing about. Don't you want to be economically resilient? If you allow someone to build in an area that you have strong indication is at risk of flooding, as opposed to saying, hey, we have this beautiful tool, this data we have invested in as a community, and we can show you the best place to develop. That builds a stronger economic community in addition to reducing flood risk. Next. So, but if we really want to go the extra mile, we're going to put teeth in this. One thing I like to say is, do I have a dog in the fight? And when you look at the effective maps, particularly, I'll just say in Arkansas, for example, we have a lot of maps. We have maps from the 80s. I have a couple of maps from the late 70s. So when you're looking at maps such as that, and you're looking to see if it's in the floodplain or not, you don't have a lot of dogs in the fight, and the dog that you have is very little because you don't have any information to regulate. You don't have a base flood elevation, and your floodplain is generally underestimating what the flood risk is. But when I have BLE data, my dog starts to get bigger. I have a bigger bite. But when I incorporate it formally into my local regulatory floodplain, I've gone from a Chihuahua to a pit bull. It's a very nice pit bull. Pit bulls get, they're maligned all the time. This is a nice pit bull. This is a pit bull that's going to help you guide your development. So we're going to expand the local regulatory floodplain. Let's see how that will work. In this particular case, and this is not in Northwest Arkansas, this is in Southeast Arkansas, there are homeowners. They're looking at a plot of land. They want to renovate this existing home, and it will rise to the level of substantial improvement. Next. So we're going to give them a bit more information. We're going to put a little green in it because this green we're putting into it is going to save them money because they are going to build resiliently using this flood risk information. Next. So the floodplain administrator looks at the existing home site on the effective map. And as you see, this home is outside of the floodplain. The homeowner's like, this is great. This is a perfect place for me. And I don't have to buy flood insurance, which of course we would never recommend. Next. But in this community, they expanded their regulatory floodplain to include those areas added in to the existing effective floodplain. And when you look at it in this situation, then you see that that home is clearly within the extended regulatory floodplain. The thing here is that now you can sit here and talk to them about the flood risk. You can tell them, okay, no, technically you do not have to buy insurance, but this demonstrates that this would be a really good idea. And because it has been incorporated formally into the local ordinance, into the local code, you can also require them to build to at least the minimum base flood elevation. But probably if you're a community that is incorporating BLE data, you have a fairly significant freeboard. And so they will have to build above that base flood elevation. Next. So what does this incorporation look like? Well, it begins with conversations with your CTP, conversations with FEMA, conversations with other communities that have gone down this route, talking to your developers, your planning commission, your mayors, all of your local CEOs, and most importantly, your residents, because this is going to be formally incorporated into the local regulatory environment. So you can change your ordinance to include definitions and acknowledgements of the BLE data. Next. And when you do this, the finishing touch on the use of the base level engineering data. Next. In our sample ordinance incorporating base level engineering data, which we have developed here in Arkansas. Next, you will see that not only do we reference the traditional, we include the traditional reference to the FIS and the effective map, but we have also included an explicit reference to base level engineering data. It is explicitly incorporated into the ordinance, although I tell people they already, without the formal incorporation, have the ability to use the BLE data for this purpose, because in the state of Arkansas, it says that FAs are empowered to take reasonable measures to ensure flood risk in their community. It is not tied explicitly to the effective map. Next. We expand this definition into our model flood damage prevention code. Next. Including a description of how the base level engineering should be used. In this case, we're outlining the use in a conservative manner. We're saying you're using the BLE data when there is an increased floodplain boundary and or a higher BFE. We are also making sure that they understand you cannot use it, BLE data, if it's going to reduce the floodway width and or lower the base flood elevation. Next. You put all of this together, in order to get to this point, this means you've had those discussions with your community members. You've had the discussions with your FPA, your permitting people, your local officials. And so you're putting it all together. And when you've done all of that, you've created the Arkansas BLE special. Next.
So we've already had a couple people in here say they're hungry, Whit, and I hope besides walking away from yours and Susan's closing presentations here, that we don't walk away just hungry, but also have learned that from all the benefits that we've seen today, you can work with communities to have them adopt and incorporate using BLE in everyday floodplain management, hazard mitigation planning, emergency management, et cetera. So we're at the kind of the end, but we've got a couple more slides. Let me just, one for you, Diane, quick question. And maybe the FMNI folks might know this too. Has FEMA maintained a list or record of communities that have adopted BLE in their ordinances?
That'd probably be
Brian,
over here.
would you guys?
Well, no, we don't have I was just thinking about starting one today, though.
There's not
As far as I know, we don't have one.
there's not a logical place for us to put that.
This is with, we
Yeah.
use it in our higher standards, in the CIS.
Yeah, CIS has a place to put the higher standards, and you could make an entry that BLE data is referenced in the flood damage prevention ordinance or order there. But I'm not sure that's going to produce a list per se. You would just be able to look it up.
You'd be able to determine whether that community did it. There's no way to extract that exquisite piece of data to produce a document.
We do get asked this a lot from headquarters if we have communities that have, so we'd be interested to know if we could track it in some way.
I know the Texas Floodplain Management Association does a survey from time to time where they ask about higher standards, and they do compile that data.
Maybe Capsassy, one of those functions would have a place where they could capture that. Because they do track higher standards and where they're from.
I'm thinking about reaching out to the person at headquarters who adjusts CIS and ask them if it's a possibility to.
Yeah, it would be a good, it'd be, and it'd be a good catch for this.
It would.
Yeah, I think this is a good thing to continue to work on afterwards. I took it as a follow-up for action item. Whit, I don't know if you have the capability to put in the chat, if you click everyone, if you have a link to that sample Arkansas ordinance, we've had a request for that. If not, not right now, maybe we can include that then when we send out the document.
So
Yeah, or
I'm
we can send
looking,
it. Go
I'm
ahead.
looking right now.
Okay, and if not, we can also send a PDF of it with the PDF of this. I'm going to move things along a little bit. I added a slide here at the last minute as kind of a reference for people of sample ordinance language to use. We're not going to have time to talk or walk through it, but this will be in your PDF. But what I'd like to do before we move on is to ask people to put in the chat, speaking of the chat, what are touch points where we could be talking about BLE? Other than like the CCO meeting, you include that in there. So especially FMI folks, when you meet and talk with communities, what are those different times so we can encourage throughout Region 6 people being able to say, oh, hey, we've got BLE in your area. Are you using or whatever? I don't know if there's a couple that might come to your two minds.
Well,
or touch point.
I do something similar to what Whit was describing, that where she had that red outline around that one paragraph. There is similar language in the model ordinances in the areas I work in. And I quite often point out to floodplain officials in communities and explain to them that they have expressed powers within that language to apply knowledge that they may be in possession of about flood risks and utilize that in their efforts to promote responsible development. So I would say every chance you get.
Yeah. So like anytime you're having a conversation, whether it's a CAV, a CAC, or just give them a call or CRS visit, or
As soon as the discussion of flood risk comes up and it oftentimes goes to, well, what can I do? I always tell them you can do what is appropriate, and you'll find language in your regulations that support that.
great, thank you. The other thing I just would like to ask is maybe you can put in the chat or send us information. And again, you do, are there any resources that jump out that you could see help with that conversation, as well as help communities adopt early the BLE and not wait till a firm? Anything come to mind? Something that risk map folks can, something insurance folks can, headquarters. Are there any resources you need, material, trainings, anything come to mind? And again, anybody online too, put it in the chat too of other resources.
I think the big challenge for everybody right now is really understanding what it is.
Yeah.
There's
jurisdictional challenges with that. My jurisdiction, New Mexico, has a lot of pushback. For them to do something additional, even though it would benefit them. They have a couple communities. I brought it up at a CAB I did, but in Roswell, they were aware of it. They were appreciative, and they took notes. But other places, not so much.
Do they need more training, or what do you think? Or more visits, or
No,
more money?
yeah. A direct better benefit. I mean, they're still in the pushing back from basic regulation at all. I mean, that's I just want them to become participators.
Yeah. Well, we'll put that question out too when we send this out one last time, just to get feedback so we keep the dialogue going. But speaking and keep going, I want to finish this up here and pass the baton back to Diane to talk about next steps that we can be doing. Kind of summarize this up. Diane?
Sure. So these are the things we're asking you for, which is what we just asked in the room here and asked all of you to put in the chat. We just listed a few. This is not everything because we know you know lots more about opportunities you have. So I've listed a couple on this slide. You can look at it, and I hope you'll share with us in the chat things that we can include for everyone to be doing. And the other part about becoming an ambassador, I mean, that's one of the things that all of us can learn more about BLE and to be able to talk about it in the field. Whit has a way of putting it where people understand it. Susan has a way of bringing things that more hands-on and letting them compare so that they see that it closely matches. Think how you could do it in your community. It's kind of like we can be a force multiplier if we all become better speakers about BLE and what is it to them. And then the last part is, of course, to encourage that early adoption rather than waiting for a firm update. We know we have communities that have paper maps. I was just doing the count, and we have at least 122 paper maps out there in our region still. We will be using BLE as a starting point on that. So, but it's going to take us a while. So if they already have BLE, please encourage them to use it now and be getting used to it. And the last part was I was going to tell you a story of equity. We've heard stories today from a lot of people. Shanine was telling a story about a community that did not understand that they had a risk. And then I heard another story from Whit about a community that knew there was risk. So this is a story about a lady that contacted the chief counsel at headquarters. And I don't know how she got a hold of them, but they filtered down, an email got to me and said, please call this lady. And basically, all they knew was they said, you know, they told her, so I went to ASFPM and I heard about this base level engineering, and I know they have it in Region 6. I'm going to encourage you to talk to them. Her problem was she's in an area that she knows that what's on the firm does not match what they see every day because it floods all the time. They live in an area that it's basically the house is not something they can live in anymore. They use it as a vacation spot on the weekends with the grandkids. But she sees people all around and move into houses because they're low cost and move all their possessions in because this is how they spent all the money they had. And she says, we just go there on weekends. But she says, I know it floods, but I go down and talk to the floodplain administrator and they said, well, all I have is the firm and it says it's a zone X and it's just fine. And so the realtors are selling the property, repeatedly selling the property to people. It floods again and again and they lose the property and leave it and then it's sold again. So she says, what do? I'm trying to tell my neighbors and I have nothing to show them. And at least somebody knew, well, there's basal engineering and pointed her to this. So I said, well, let me just show you the site and walk you through what it shows. And we looked at it and I said, does that look like what you see? And she says, absolutely. She's not on the edge of a high risk area. She's in the middle of it, kind of like what Whit was talking about. Sometimes you don't realize how deep in the water you are until you see a real picture of that. So she said, and you know what? She says, the other part is they just raised my taxes because I'm in according to them, zone X, and I have this house here. She says, we can't use this house. It's just a place we go camping on the weekends with the grandkids. And she says, how do I tell them it's not worth what you think it's worth? And she says, we don't have the money to keep it. If that's what they're going to do the taxes. So I'll tell you what, here's how you get the report. You can send a link to that report to someone and they can print the report without ever going to the site. So I just sent her the link and I said, go talk to your floodplain administrator and see what they can do to help. So I think what it is we need to talk more about it. We need to share more about it. We have people out there who are willing to talk about the risk is not what you see on the firm, that the risk is greater. And maybe we need to be, encouragers for those people to, lift them up and help them, get what they need to talk to the floodplain administrator. But I would encourage all of us to be able to talk about it openly and to help address that equity issue of people who are losing all they have because they don't realize the risk is there. And she says, I try to tell everybody that moves out here, you need to be prepared. It's going to flood, and try to tell them that. But she said, I'm just one person. So I encourage all of us to not just be one person, but to be a group that helps others in this whole communicating about base level engineering.
And Diane, that's a great way to end this. That another use of the BLE data is to help identify those areas that are more socially vulnerable, such as in this case. So hopefully, I hope everybody's walked away with something new that they've learned about BLE, that the applications of it, as well as the importance of going ahead and adopting it early and having that conversation over and over again. It's not going to just happen the one time, as we just heard going out the first time. They have to hear it more, as Whit put in the chat. For some of you who didn't see it, training is needed. Again, we'll continue to support you from here. Let us know what the resources are that you need, and continue to promote the importance of BLE. As you could tell by Diane's opening slides, it's here to stay, and it's growing more, and it's going to be throughout Region 6 here in the next couple of years. Well, again, thank you very much for all your time, and to all my presenters, thank you very much for being part of it. Ryan, Diane, Shanine, Martha, Jack, and Rachel, won't forget you, even though I had you in the wrong spot, and of course, Whit and Susan, thank you so much